So what if I told you that chugging plain water during a grueling marathon could actually be more dangerous than not drinking anything at all?
I mean, it sounds completely backwards, right?
Totally backwards, because we're so conditioned to think of the human body as this like simple combustion engine. You put fuel and water in the tank, you step on the gas, and you just go.
Yeah, but when you step into the actual clinical reality of sports medicine, you quickly realize that engine analogy is, well, it's completely broken.
Which is exactly why we're here. Welcome to today's deep dive. If you're a medical student prepping for boards, or maybe a young healthcare professional treating athletes, or honestly just a deeply curious learner trying to optimize your own training, you are in the right place.
Definitely.
Our mission today is to completely cut through the fitness influencer noise. We are ignoring the gym myths and the fad diets.
Right, we're focusing entirely on the hard biological chemistry of sports nutrition and exercise physiology.
Exactly. And we're pulling our insights from this remarkably comprehensive body of work by sports dietitian Laila Almazri and exercise physiologist Simon Bartlett. It's called 100 Questions and Answers About Sports Nutrition and Exercise.
It's a fantastic resource.
It really is. So we're going to equip you with evidence-based clinical tools to understand everything from, how your cells store glycogen to the life-threatening dangers of electrolyte imbalances. But we aren't just going to list statistics here.
No, the goal is to synthesize the clinical data. Like, knowing what happens just isn't enough. You really have to understand why the body triggers these specific physiological reactions.
Right. So let's start with the raw materials, the fuel for this chemical plant. And I feel like we have to start with the single most misunderstood macronutrient in the entire diet industry.
Carbohydrates.
Yes, carbs. The clinical data suggests that the optimal athlete's plate should be 50 to 60% carbohydrates, 15 to 20% protein, and 20 to 30% fat.
That's the baseline, yeah.
But there is this specific biological concept here that just stopped me in my tracks. It's this phrase from the book, fat burns in a carbohydrate flame. What does that actually mean? Because I just picture like carbs as the kindling and fat as the heavy logs in a bonfire.
Well, that is a really popular way to visualize it, but it's a bit too simple for what's actually happening at the cellular level.
Okay, lay it on me.
It's less about kindling and more about a chemical catalyst.
Yeah.
So to efficiently break down fats for energy, your body requires certain metabolic intermediates. And one of the most important ones is a molecule called oxaloacetate.
Oxaloacetate. Okay.
Right, which is primarily generated from the breakdown of carbohydrates.
Okay, wait, let's unpack this. Are you saying that if I severely deplete my carbohydrates like so many popular diets tell us to do, I'm actually sabotaging my own ability to burn fat?
Precisely.
Yeah.
If you restrict carbs too much, that metabolic pathway just stalls out. You literally cannot burn fat optimally without a baseline of carbohydrate metabolism happening at the same time.
Wow. So if I'm a medical professional advising an endurance athlete and they're like, hey, I want to try a strict low-carb diet to lean out, what is actually happening inside their body during a race?
Oh, they're going to hit a wall hard.
Right.
Because when you restrict carbohydrates, you rapidly deplete the body's glycogen stores. And glycogen is simply just glucose packed together for storage.
And the human body has a surprisingly tiny fuel tank for it, doesn't it?
It really does. The average athlete can only store about 400 to 500 grams of carbohydrate as glycogen in their entire body.
I want to break down where those stores actually live because this is crucial for anyone studying human physiology. So the vast majority, about 300 to 400 grams, that's locked inside the muscle cells, right?
Yep, the muscle cells are the biggest reservoir.
Then the liver holds about 75 to 100 grams. And there is a tiny amount, like roughly 25 grams, just circulating in your blood as blood sugar.
And here is the fascinating physiological quirk about that. Muscle glycogen can only be used by the specific muscle it's stored in. Yeah, your bicep cannot donate glycogen to your quad. It's locked in. But the liver is altruistic. It breaks down its glycogen to maintain blood sugar levels for the brain and the nervous system.
Okay, so what happens when the liver runs out? Like, the athlete is still running, the brain obviously still needs energy. Where does the body get it if the carbs are just gone?
That's when it initiates this massive metabolic workaround called gluconeogenesis.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Yeah, the body basically starts breaking down its own muscle tissue. It takes the amino acids from the muscle the athlete is working so hard to build, and it literally converts them into glucose just to keep the brain functioning.
That is wild.
Wow.
Which actually brings us perfectly to protein, because the fitness industry pushes protein like it's this magic muscle-building energy source.
Hmm.
But biologically, protein is not stored in muscle cells as an energy reserve at all, is it?
Not at all. Its primary role is structural and functional. I mean, it builds tissue, it forms hormones, creates enzymes, synthesizes antibodies.
Right.
Using protein for energy is an absolute last resort for the body.
And there is a hard biological ceiling on protein synthesis, isn't there? Because the book mentions that consuming massive amounts of it, specifically anything over 2 grams per kilogram of body weight, it doesn't magically build more muscle.
No, it actually causes systemic chaos.
Chaos. How so?
Well, when you overload the system with protein,
Huh.
you aren't optimizing the machine, You're creating an exhaust problem. Breaking down all that excess protein creates nitrogenous waste products.
Oh, so the kidneys have to go into overdrive to clear out those metabolites.
Yes. And to clear that waste, the kidneys demand massive amounts of water.
Ah, I see where this is going.
Right. So overconsuming protein actively pulls cellular water out of the system to flush the kidneys, which basically predisposes the athlete to severe dehydration before they even start sweating.
Man, that transitions us perfectly into our next major biological hurdle. Because we know what fuel the body needs now, but introducing that fuel during extreme physical exertion often makes the entire gastrointestinal system just rebel.
Oh, absolutely.
If you've ever felt nauseous during a long run, this is exactly why.
Yeah. Exercise-induced GI distress is incredibly common. And it happens because of this massive physiological conflict of interest between digestion and movement.
And the mode of activity seems to be a huge trigger here, like jostling, sports running, soccer, basketball. They cause significantly more GI trauma than stable sports like swimming or cycling.
Yeah, the mechanical trauma is very real. You are physically bouncing the stomach and the intestines up and down while they're trying to perform these really delicate, microscopic, absorptive processes.
Right.
It's just incredibly disruptive to the gut lining.
But there is a biological variable here that completely blew my mind. Female athletes often experience more GI distress than men,
They do, yeah.
and it's directly tied to slower gastric emptying rates, which are influenced by estrogen and hormonal fluctuations during the menstrual cycle.
And this is a critical point for any clinicians listening. Like, are you adjusting nutritional strategies based on the hormonal profile of your patient?
That's such a good point.
Because if you treat a female athlete's gut exactly like a male's during a high estrogen phase of her cycle, you are completely ignoring basic endocrinology. Her stomach physically empties slower.
And if her stomach is emptying slower, the chemistry of what she is drinking matters even more. Let's talk about the 8% rule.
Ah, yes.
If an athlete consumes sports drink or an energy gel with a carbohydrate concentration greater than 8%, it actively delays gastric emptying.
It's pure osmosis in action. And
No.
it is a brutal physiological trade-off.
So imagine a massive traffic jam, right? If I dump a highly concentrated, thick, sugary energy gel into my stomach without drinking enough water, it's like a multi-car pileup on the highway. The sugar just sits there.
Exactly. And how does the body clear that pileup? It sends emergency vehicles.
Right.
So in this case, the body actually pulls blood and water from your systemic circulation and dumps it into the intestinal lumen.
Just to dilute the sugar mass so it can be absorbed. But wait, if I'm sprinting, my leg muscles desperately need that blood for oxygen. Are you saying the stomach literally steals the blood from the legs?
It absolutely steals it. It pulls blood away from the working muscles and away from the skin where it's needed for cooling.
Wow.
And the result of that biological theft is severe cramping, bloating, nausea, and osmotic diarrhea. The body literally starves the muscles just to clear the stomach.
And there is a hard biological speed limit here, too. The stomach can optimally absorb, at most, about 600 milliliters of fluid per hour.
Right.
Pushing past that doesn't hydrate you faster. It just guarantees a sloshing stomach.
Which is why understanding fluid dynamics is just the absolute bedrock of sports medicine.
Mm-hmm.
Every chemical reaction we just discussed, glycogen oxidation, protein metabolism, gut osmosis, it relies entirely on water.
Which brings us to the hydration paradox, the dual threats of dehydration and overhydration.
This is such a critical area.
The first thing that really challenged my assumptions is that thirst is a terrible predictor of your fluid needs.
It really is. By the time your brain triggers the conscious sensation of thirst, you are already operating at a physiological deficit. Your blood volume has already dropped, and your core temperature is already rising.
Think about the math of sweating for a second. In a hot environment, an athlete can lose 2 to 3 pints of sweat per hour. And for every single liter of sweat lost, they're losing roughly 1,000 milligrams of sodium.
That's a huge loss.
And there are two distinct ways this goes wrong. Voluntary dehydration, like, a wrestler deliberately restricting fluids to make a weight class, and involuntary dehydration.
Right. And involuntary dehydration is fascinating because the athlete is actively trying to stay hydrated, but the math just doesn't work.
What do you mean?
Well, take a 90-minute soccer match in the heat. Even if that player drinks exactly 600 milliliters per hour, which is the absolute maximum the gut can process, their sweat rate might be double that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so they will end the game in a severely dehydrated state simply because the environmental demands outpace their biological absorption limit.
But here's where the paradox kicks in, and this goes back to my question at the very beginning of the deep dive. If an athlete finishes that soccer game, realizes they lost massive amounts of fluid, and tries to fix it by chugging gallons of pure, plain water, they can trigger a life-threatening condition called hyponatremia?
Yes, water intoxication. It occurs when your blood sodium concentration drops below 130 millimoles per liter.
But how does just drinking water become fatal? I read this detail in the book. Cold water doesn't actually absorb into the stomach any faster than room temperature water.
No, it doesn't.
The only reason we think it does is because it's refreshing, so people voluntarily drink up to 80% more of it. But if they're just chugging cold, plain water during a massive endurance event, what is actually happening in the blood?
They're actively diluting their remaining sodium. When you sweat out massive amounts of sodium and then replace that lost fluid with plain water, the sodium concentration in your blood just plummets.
It's like taking a car battery and constantly topping it off with distilled water, but never adding any battery acid. Eventually, the fluid is so diluted that the battery just cannot hold a charge. The nervous system shorts out.
That analogy is actually perfect because the clinical presentation of this is what makes emergency sports medicine so incredibly difficult.
How so?
Well, a severely dehydrated athlete and a hyponatremic athlete can look almost identical on the sidelines.
Really?
Yeah, both present with confusion, lethargy, headache, severe cramping. But the medical interventions are violently different.
Because if you misdiagnose them...
If you look at a confused, cramping marathon runner and assume they're just dehydrated, and you give them standard IV fluids or tell them to drink more plain water, you could kill them.
That is terrifying.
It is. The osmotic gradient in their body shifts drastically. Because the blood is now so diluted, water rushes into their brain cells to try and balance the sodium concentration. Yeah, and that causes cerebral edema brain swelling, which leads to seizures, coma, and potentially death. You must treat hyponatremia with hypertonic solutions or high-sodium foods, never plain water.
Wow, that is a terrifying distinction to have to make on the fly. So up to this point, we've been talking about the baseline human body, right? Basic carbs, gut mechanics, hydration limits.
Right.
But what happens when that baseline fundamentally shifts? Like, what happens when we introduce specific physiological stresses like aging or gender-specific disorders or extreme environments?
Well, this is exactly where generalized nutrition advice completely falls apart,
Right.
and why clinical precision is non-negotiable.
Let's start with a condition known as the female athlete triad. It's described in the source material as a dangerous, interrelated cascade of three things: disordered eating, which creates a severe energy deficit, menstrual disturbances like amenorrhea, and bone loss, leading to osteopenia or osteoporosis.
Right.
And it's incredibly common in aesthetic sports like gymnastics or weight class sports.
And what's vital for a medical student or a coach to understand here is the systemic endocrinology.
Okay.
A calorie deficit in a highly trained female athlete doesn't just make her feel tired. When energy availability drops too low, the human body acts like a sinking ship. It starts triaging its functions.
So it shuts down what it doesn't need to survive right that second.
Exactly. The brain decides that reproduction is non-essential for immediate survival, so it downregulates the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis. Estrogen production absolutely plummets.
And estrogen is biologically required for bone remodeling, right?
Yes, that's the devastating mechanism here. Without estrogen, the skeleton literally begins to leach calcium and minerals into the bloodstream just to maintain basic metabolic functions.
It's a systemic shutdown triggered purely by a lack of fuel. That is intense.
Now, speaking of physiological shifts, let's look at masters athletes, which the book clinically defines as women over 35 and men over 40.
I found this fascinating. As we age, our thirst reflex naturally dulls. But we also lose aerobic capacity, dropping our VO2 max by about 5 milliliters per kilogram per minute every single decade.
Yeah, and their GI tract efficiency changes fundamentally too.
How so?
Well, older athletes require fewer total calories because their baseline metabolic rate drops. But paradoxically, they require significantly higher amounts of specific micronutrients.
Like vitamin C, E, B6, B12, calcium, and magnesium. But why do they need more if they are eating less?
Because their intestinal cells simply aren't as efficient at extracting and absorbing those micronutrients from food anymore. The basic chemistry of digestion degrades.
It just completely rewires their cellular needs.
Yeah.
And what about external environmental stress? Like in extreme cold, it turns out a shivering athlete will expend up to 60% of their total body carbohydrate stores just to maintain a 98.6-degree core temperature.
Yeah, because shivering is just an involuntary high-frequency muscle contraction. And high-intensity muscle contractions rely almost exclusively on glycogen. So if you send an athlete into a freezing environment without a massive carbohydrate surplus, they will fatigue prematurely.
Not because their leg muscles weren't strong enough, but because the basic act of staying warm drained their cellular fuel tank.
Exactly.
This actually brings to mind another specific population with unique chemical needs: vegetarian athletes.
Oh, this is the big one.
The clinical data states a pretty strict rule here. Vegetarians need 1.8 times the iron of a meat eater and 50% more zinc. A nearly double requirement for iron seems massive. What is driving that discrepancy?
It comes entirely down to bioavailability. Plant-based iron is what we call non-heme iron.
Okay.
And the human intestine is incredibly inefficient at absorbing non-heme iron compared to the heme iron found in animal tissue.
And what about the zinc?
Right, the zinc in plants is often bound by compounds called phytates, which actively block its absorption in the gut.
So you can eat a massive amount of spinach, but your cells only get a tiny fraction of the actual mineral.
Exactly. The gross intake has to be vastly higher to achieve the exact same net cellular delivery.
Which perfectly illustrates why you cannot just guess with sports nutrition. You really have to know the underlying chemistry.
You do.
But because achieving that perfect, individualized chemical balance takes immense time and discipline, human beings constantly look for shortcuts. Which brings us to the wild west of sports medicine: supplements, ergogenic aids, and identifying snake oil.
It really is a minefield for athletes and clinicians alike.
Truly. Because the supplement industry is largely unregulated by the FDA. Manufacturers can make these wild structure and function claims without ever proving clinical efficacy.
Yeah, it leads to products that lack the promised ingredients or worse, contain dangerous banned contaminants.
So the gold standard for safety is looking for the USP, the United States Pharmacopoeia Verified mark, right? Because that actually confirms chemical quality and purity.
Yes, always look for the USP mark. And structurally, we have to distinguish between an ergogenic aid, which is a substance that genuinely enhances biological performance, and an ergolytic substance, which degrades it.
Right, a classic ergolytic would be like a severe fad diet or extreme alcohol consumption.
Yeah.
Let's focus on the two most famous, legally permitted ergogenic aids in the world: creatine and caffeine.
Okay, let's do it.
So creatine is naturally produced in our kidneys and liver, and the clinical consensus is clear that supplementing it does increase lean body mass and aids high-intensity short-burst output. But I want to know the mechanism. How does eating a powder actually make a muscle contract harder?
Well, creatine works by expanding the phosphocreatine energy system inside the muscle cell. And that allows for vastly faster ATP regeneration during maximal effort.
Okay.
But here's the catch that most people miss. To get the creatine into the muscle cell against a concentration gradient, you need an insulin spike.
So you can't just mix it with water. You have to take it with a simple carbohydrate to trigger the insulin.
Exactly. And the primary side effect athletes need to be warned about is rapid weight gain, which is purely due to cellular water retention as the creatine pulls fluid into the muscle.
Makes sense. And then there's caffeine. It's this powerful psychoactive substance that increases fat utilization and reduces perceived exertion. But it's a double-edged sword, right?
It's entirely about dose response. A controlled amount of caffeine mobilizes free fatty acids, sparing your glycogen. But too much caffeine causes hyperacidity in the stomach and aggressively accelerates gastric emptying.
Which sends us right back to the GI distress and osmotic diarrhea we talked about earlier.
Yep.
But here is where the data gets incredibly surprising. Amidst all these expensive, heavily marketed powders and engineered pills, researchers identified an absolute champion for post-workout recovery. And it's, wait for it, chocolate milk.
The clinical data on this is genuinely fantastic.
Studies show it performs just as well, if not better, than incredibly expensive commercial recovery drinks. Specifically, drinking chocolate milk after a workout significantly lowers creatine kinase in the bloodstream. Now, I'm assuming creatine kinase is something we want lowered.
Yes, definitely. Creatine kinase is a primary clinical marker of muscle tissue damage. High levels mean your muscles are breaking down.
So how does a basic carton of elementary school chocolate milk stop muscle breakdown better than some high-tech lab formula?
It's all about perfect biological synergy. Chocolate milk naturally provides the exact 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 ratio of carbohydrates to protein that the muscle cell demands to synthesize glycogen efficiently.
Wow.
Furthermore, it contains two types of protein: whey protein, which absorbs rapidly into the blood to halt that muscle breakdown immediately, and casein protein, which absorbs very slowly to provide sustained amino acids for repair over several hours.
And it's a liquid, so it's naturally suspended in fluid with calcium and sodium to rehydrate you.
It is practically engineered by nature for human physiological recovery.
That is incredible, which proves a massive clinical point. Supplements should only ever supplement a well-built biological foundation.
Exactly.
If your fundamental carbohydrate intake is chronically low or your basic fluid dynamics are broken, no amount of USP-verified creatine or caffeine is going to save your performance. You just cannot out-supplement a fundamental physiological deficit.
Biology will always win.
Always. Which brings us to the end of our deep dive today. But to fulfill the educational mission of this show, we are not letting you go without a practical review exercise.
No, we have a highly effective clinical tool pulled directly from the research to help you calculate your exact fluid needs.
Yes, this is something you can use on yourself tomorrow or use to evaluate your patients.
Let's hear it.
Next time you do a strenuous workout, I want you to weigh yourself dry, meaning no sweaty clothes immediately before and immediately after the session. For every single pound you lose during that workout, you are in a biological fluid deficit. The clinical formula is that you need to drink 24 ounces of fluid to replace the sweat, plus the respiratory fluid you exhaled, for every single pound lost. Try it. Do the math and see if your current hydration plan actually measures up to the reality of your own biology.
I guarantee most athletes who try this are absolutely shocked to find out how deeply underhydrated they truly operate on a daily basis.
Oh, totally. So, to summarize our journey through the chemical plant today, peak physical performance isn't about starving yourself to look a certain way, and it certainly isn't about finding a magic pill.
Correct.
It is about deeply respecting your body's biological chemistry. It's about giving it the specific carbohydrates it needs to catalyze fat and avoid consuming its own muscle.
Right.
It's about respecting the biological speed limits of the stomach to prevent osmotic traffic jams. And it's about dialing in the precise balance of sodium and water to keep the nervous system firing and avoid catastrophic swelling in the brain.
And if you respect the physiology, the performance will naturally follow. But as we wrap up, there is a fascinating philosophical reality to consider here. As sports nutrition science becomes increasingly precise, as we learn exactly how to chemically manipulate cellular glycogen, how to artificially boost our blood volume through hypertonic hydration protocols, and how to fundamentally alter our brain's perception of pain, with powerful legal psychoactive substances like caffeine, where's the line?
Oh, that's a great question.
Where is the line between optimizing human biology and artificially engineering it? If we treat the human body entirely like a volatile chemical plant, constantly tweaking the laboratory inputs to force a greater mechanical output, at what point are we no longer playing a sport but just running a very elaborate, very sweaty chemistry experiment?
Man, that is a phenomenal question. Keep that in mind the next time you are staring at the label of a sports drink trying to decipher the chemistry. Until next time, keep digging deeper.